Hi, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and welcome to my report cards for Bloomburrow. In this series, I review every mythic rare from the set and give it a letter grade based on how mythic it feels, how unique the design is, and the creative deck building opportunities it provides. In this video, I'll be reviewing the 6 mythic Calamity beasts. As a disclaimer, these are just my personal opinions as a casual Commander player, and I have the utmost respect for everyone over at Wizards of the Coast who work so hard to bring these creative designs to life. I hope I earn a like and subscribe from you by the end of the video, and without further ado, on to the review. The Calamity beasts of Bloomburrow are represented by the elemental creatures of the plane. There are 6 uncommon, 2 rare, and the 6 mythics that we'll be looking at today. Of the mythics, there is no red Calamity beast, but there are 2 black elementals. With that bit of bookkeeping out of the way, let's leap right into Beza, the Bounding Spring. For 2 white and 2 colorless, you get a 4/5 legendary elemental elk that says, when Beza the Bounding Spring enters, create a treasure token if an opponent controls more lands than you. You gain 4 life if an opponent has more life than you, create 2 1/1 blue fish creature tokens if an opponent controls more creatures than you, and draw a card if an opponent has more cards in hand than you. The good news is, in a multiplayer game, there's a good chance at least one player will have more of something than you. So the likelihood of Beza triggering at least a couple effects seems high. The bad news is, are these effects all that valuable to trigger? The absolute best case scenario is 2 1/1s, 4 life, a treasure, and a card, plus the 4/5 body. And while that is a lot of text, I'm not convinced that it's better than choosing a card or cards that will reliably give you exactly what you want from among these options. Granted, Beza is a better value than the sum of its parts, which you'd expect to pay at least 6 or 7 mana for. Or maybe just 2 for the bulk of this card's text, and 2 more for the treasure and 4/5 body, as evidenced by this uncommon, a major mark against this design. While the ceiling is a nice sample pack at a good price, a major issue I have is that the floor of this card is a vanilla 4/5. And if we're being honest, I don't think most players would have batted an eye if this card was printed at rare. In my opinion, this design doesn't push the envelope of what a mythic should be, primarily just existing as a Blink player's all-in-one toolbox card. Beza the Bounding Spring needs a lot more spring in its step, so I'm giving it a D. If you ever wondered what a bear does in the woods, listen up for Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. For 2 green and 4 generic, you get a star legendary elemental bear with vigilance and reach. Lumra also says, its power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. And when Lumra enters, mill 4 cards. Then return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This one is tough since it has a lot of good components to it. Scaling power and toughness are assets that suit a mythic rare. And while I probably value creatures with stats equal to your land count more than most, it clearly isn't mythic level text. And the same can be said for returning all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield, since we've seen that on several rares and even at uncommon. I do think the designers showed some restraint with a number of keywords here. Typically green mythics are plastered with them. Trample clearly would be a great fit on this card, but I'm glad they didn't just slap it on there in addition to vigilance and reach. I think this is a fine card. It can be a massive threat that also plays terrific defense, and you can get a lot of value out of the number of lands it can recur, especially if you focus on landfall effects. But it doesn't do anything to invigorate these effects or explore new space. So in my opinion, Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, whimpers by with a C. Swimming right along, we come to Eluge, the Shoreless Sea. For 3 blue and 1 generic, you get a star legendary elemental fish that says, Eluge's power and toughness are each equal to the number of islands you control. Whenever Eluge enters or attacks, put a flood counter on target land. It's an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. And the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs blue or 1 generic less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. Straight away, I love the scaling power and toughness of this creature. Being able to grow your cards in unique ways is exciting, and definitely lends to a card's mythic feel. There was a time when flooding a land made it only an island, leaving it unable to produce anything but blue mana. While it does narrow the application of this card, since you can no longer shut down your opponent's utility lands, ultimately I'd say it's for the best. You can still use the flood counters to enable your island wall creatures. Eluge also provides an additional layer of scaling, reducing the mana cost of your first instant or sorcery return by the number of lands you control with flood counters. I find a little bit of dissonance here, since Eluge's power and toughness care about islands, but the cost reduction cares about flooded lands. This too is a wise design choice. Otherwise, Eluge would enter as a 1/1 and maybe never have an opportunity to attack. The third aspect I questioned was the cost reduction being limited to the number of lands with flood counters that you control. I suppose there's no real reason to be flooding your opponent's lands, but it seems a shame to me to restrict the functionality of the card in this way. I do think the designers made another brilliant decision by making the cost reduction blue and not just colorless mana. This is a subtle change, but is far more valuable and something we aren't used to seeing, making it even more mythic feeling. I think it is a requirement to run some number of counterspells as long as Eluge is in your deck, since casting one or even a mana drain for free would be filthy. But please have some restraint and don't overdo it. Ultimately, this could be a giant creature that can give you a sizable discount on your spells. I think this is a very well thought out design that explores some familiar territory in a fresh way. Eluge sells seashells by the endless seashore and scores an A. And now, the only Calamity beast with flying. Maha, its Feathers Knight. For 2 black and 3 generic, you get a 6/5 legendary elemental bird with flying and trample. Maha also has ward, discard a card, and creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. At 5 mana, this is a rather large, evasive, trampling threat, and the added resiliency of the word cost is a welcome line of text. But certainly the point of interest here is making all opposing creatures incredibly brittle. My only complaint is that they attach these unique, powerful effects to undercosted beaters. I'd be happier with the design if Maha weren't such a threatening attacker, but it's a small complaint. What I really like about this design is how it does a whole lot without having a novel's worth of text. Doing more with less is terrific, and I think the designers showed great restraint and wisdom here. Despite being only one short sentence, Maha's ability lends itself to a wide assortment of strategies. -1/-1 counters, pingers, first strike, negative anthems, even flanking. There are plenty of opportunities for you to explore. And, being a monocolored card, Maha can slot into just about any deck you fancy. In the spirit of this card, I'll try and keep it short and leave it there. Maha, its Feathers Knight, simply deserves an A. This next Calamity beast may not be legendary, but its bite sure looks like it is. Rottenmouth Viper. For 1 black and 5 generic, you get a 6/6 elemental snake. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. This spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way. Whenever Rottenmouth Viper enters or attacks, put a blight counter on it. Then, for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. For full price, you're getting a reasonably sized creature with an enters effect that blights each opponent. Having a single permanent to sacrifice makes the cost an appealing 5 mana. If that permanent is a mana rock, you can tap it for mana and then sacrifice it as part of the additional cost. In any deck that has a focus on making tokens, it's easy to envision casting Rottenmouth Viper for only 3 mana, which is excellent. The first trigger is annoying, but not outrageous, and probably won't affect the game much. The second trigger is when the venom will really start taking hold, as Rottenmouth Viper will have 2 blight counters, making the choices start to really hurt. And if you can get to 3 and beyond blight counters, only some really dedicated token strategies, or having an insane card draw engine, will keep your enemies from succumbing. Rottenmouth Viper wants a few different things from you to really get going. Plenty of fodder to get it down cheap, possibly leaving mana free to protect it, and ways to get as many blight counters on it as possible. I'd say having haste enablers is a must, letting you blight on enter, and double blight again with an attack. 3 blights in a single fell swoop. And while nobody really enjoys when you proliferate and kill them with poison counters, I'm sure your friends will feel completely different when you proliferate your Rottenmouth Viper and kill them with snake poison, which I think is technically venom, so it's totally different. This is a powerful design with lots of deck building considerations that you can really sink your teeth into. Grade A. And the final Calamity beast eats everyone else for breakfast. Ygra, Eater of All. For 1 black, 1 green, and 3 generic, you get a 6/6 legendary elemental cat with ward, sacrifice a food. Other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their other types and have 2 generic, tap, sacrifice this permanent. You gain 3 life. Whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Ygra, Eater of All. When I first read that ward cost, I got very excited. I mean, it would essentially be hexproof, making Ygra untargetable by your opponents. Then, my excitement quickly dissipated when I read the second line of text, which means the ward cost is actually sacrifice a creature. Furthermore, you give all of your opponents the ability to pay 2 to tap and sacrifice their unsummoning sick creatures to gain life. Sure, it's not a fabulous option, but it is an option, and generally you don't want to be providing those to people you're trying to kill. The upside for you is that Ygra will quickly grow to an obscene size and threaten to devour an opponent's life total in just a few bites. Where things get truly tasty with this card, though, is the fact that it adds the artifact type to all other creatures. That means you can set up some unexpected synergies because all of your other creatures are artifacts, or you can get some extra utility out of your artifact-specific removal. This design can be fairly straightforward if you want to use it that way, or it can serve up some mouth-watering opportunities. Is anyone else feeling hungry? Grade A. And there you have it. My grades for the 6 Mythic Calamity beasts from Bloomburrow. Are my grades about right? Or are they a disaster? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope I earned a like and subscribe from you, and I'd love it if you'd share this video. If not, thanks for watching this long anyways. You can follow me on X at unsolicitedmtg for channel updates and other nonsense. And be sure to check back for part 3, where I go over all the mythic weasels and otters. Yes, there are enough of them to warrant their own category. Once again, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and who asked me anyways?